Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Problem Solving and Advanced Planning with Mediator Lisa Barrett, put on by Coho BC, the Collaborative Home Ownership Initiative. My name is Noam Dolgan, and I'm delighted to have so many people here today, especially after having to reschedule a few times. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Lisa, so much for joining us. Before we begin, especially when we talk about housing and land, it is very important to acknowledge that we have deep gratitude and understanding and appreciation for the fact that we live, we work, we play on the unceded ancestral territories of many different nations, some of which are listed here. And we are grateful to call this land home, and we acknowledge their history and their roots to this location. So what is Coho BC? What is the group that brings us here today? And Coho BC is an initiative that works together to promote co-ownership as a viable housing option for people across British Columbia, to provide the resources and professional support to groups going through the co-ownership process, to assist in the creation of co-ownership groups through a dating pool and matchmaking services, and then to facilitate the resale of these shared ownership to other potential buyers down the road. We are a collection of professionals with experience in co-ownership, co-housing, collectivity, and just generally thinking outside the box. Realtors, lawyers, builders, financial institutions, architects, and of course mediators. And that's where Lisa comes in. So if you're doing this, if you're living collectively or you're looking to buy collectively, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't deal with professionals who don't understand the complexities and the subtleties of the situation. Use the resources that Coho can provide. So who am I? My name is Noam Dolgan. I'm a realtor in Metro Vancouver, specializing in these kind of housing situations, co-ownership, green homes, and just generally real homes for real people. And before entering real estate, my background was in environmental education and institutional greening, community engagement. And so really I look at housing as the number one choice you'll make for social, environmental, and economic sustainability. And you have to make sure that your house really meets all those criteria, and social and community being an important one of those. So what co-ownership looks like can be very varied, and we encourage you to come to our intro to co-ownership sessions to learn much more about this topic. Common examples include communal living, where a group of adults or families share a collective space, or collective ownership with private suites, where you own a lot that has multiple houses on it, or a house with multiple suites in it, etc. In these situations, you would own collectively, but still have some privacy, but there would certainly be a lot of collective natures, shared spaces, shared responsibility, shared decisions that would need to happen. How much to share is really up to you, right? What your co-ownership can look like. Do you just share the land and ownership, but everything else is private? Do you have total collectivity? Do you have some collectivity, spaces, yards, laundry? Do you have collective stuff? And so all these things go into how you draft a partnership that works best for you. So when finding a partner and when thinking in advance, you have to think about some important questions. The biggest ones being, what's my timeline? How much community do I want? And what kind of partner am I looking for? And again, I can go into this in much more detail in a future conversation. In addition to co-ownership, Lisa, who's here, has a lot of experience in co-housing and co-op housing and other forms of collective housing. So co-housing being a stratified form of housing with a real focus on community and collectivity and shared spaces. And so we're delighted to have her share her expertise on the whole range of housing and community questions. So thank you, Lisa, so much for being here today and for being our guest speaker and for sharing your expertise with us. And please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your history with housing mediation and helping people make their homes a wonderful, positive space. And I might have to unmute you. Sorry, I've lost you here. There you are.
There we go. Thank you, Noam. And welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. And also I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam people. And I've grown up here and lived here all my life. And these are lands and waters that I care very deeply about. So it is, it's just with gratitude that I get to join you from these wonderful areas. I am a mediator by training. I've been practicing as a mediator for over 20 years. I always forget how long it is. I kind of have to go by how old my children are. I've got ongoing practice, civil practice, that is mostly rooted in the civil rosters of Mediate BC and ADR ICBC, which is the Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Canada, BC branch. I also do arbitration work, but I don't find it nearly as satisfying as the mediation work. I've worked with the Civil Resolution Tribunal as well. And I've also been a local government official. I was a two-term mayor and regional director, and I have seen various iterations of co-housing, cooperative housing, interesting strata developments from the sort of regulatory side, where we do zoning and building requirements, that sort of thing. So we've got a number of options for people to collectively gather. We're talking about co-ownership today. And I think in terms of mediation, the experiences that people have had in co-housing and other types of co-ownership are relevant. And so I'm hoping that, you know, from my experience in dealing with those issues as a mediator, I can maybe help guide thinking around what we should be considering in advance of going into a co-ownership proposition, and how we can in advance start to think of circumstances that might arise that could devolve into a type of conflict that we hadn't anticipated. And therefore, I think it's really important to do that thinking up front, so that you may not think of all of the possibilities that could happen, but at least you think of some of them, or think in terms of generalities about, if this type of a situation arises, how are we going to deal with that? And that's where I think a mediator can help. If the parties to that agreement aren't very skilled in consensus-based decision-making processes, or non-adversarial ways of communicating. And not everyone is. I mean, you know, many of us grew up in sort of a, I don't know, maybe a dog eat dog kind of world where you just kind of assert yourself. But in these kind of arrangements, we really have to be thinking about everyone's best interest, because we're all in the same boat. If we're all living in the same, maybe if not the same house, but a number of houses in an area, or different types of housing in the same building. So we've got opportunities to explore with our potential partners in these arrangements. And I think that's where a mediator can help to identify those issues that might not be really obvious at the beginning. Because surely when, you know, we're anticipating going into an arrangement with people to find housing that suits our needs, that is affordable. And, golly, we know right now that that is very difficult for a lot of people. So, the anticipation of that and the joyful prospect of that is wonderful. But I think we also need to dig down and figure out where might there be points of agreement and points of disagreement, and to come clear-eyed to those and figure out ways that we can work around that, or even make those areas of disagreement work for us so that we have a better living arrangement once we move into that partnership. So let me see. Norm and I had talked about the pre-agreement considerations, and a number of those things are a bit sort of nuts and boltsy. So I would say that one of the things that I would encourage people to think about is what are your particular circumstances? And Noam sort of briefly went through the idea of, who are you going to be partnering with? Do they have the same kinds of timelines that you have in mind? Perhaps you're just looking at this as a stepping stone to having a separate, your own home without a co-ownership scenario or an arrangement. How long would that look? How far down the road are we looking? Do your partners understand that? Are you looking with people that you know? Are you looking to do this with relatives or with close friends? Are you, going through a dating service like the Coho has proposed, where we can have, people who don't know each other but do have similar interests and can come together in sort of, I don't know, it's a made by arrangement kind of relationship. And that is even more interesting, because where you may know your family or you may know your close friends, it's very important to essentially talk clearly and speak honestly with the people that you may be entering into the agreement with. And I would say that also goes with your family and close friends, because we all make assumptions about what other people need. We may know what we need, but I think it is important to go through the questions that, Noam raised earlier about, what are your objectives? What is it that is important to you? And I think we need, as potential co-owners, to really think that through ourselves, so that when we come to the table with our partners, we have that clear in our own minds, and we can talk about those things honestly. We know what our red lines are, whatever it is that we just can't live with. Somebody just may absolutely hate classical music, and the other person may absolutely hate metal. So you may end up with some conflict there that has to be resolved if you're going to overcome that hurdle, but you may not even know that without testing those assumptions about what we know about the other party. So I think that is a very important part of the coming together, the meeting of minds of the people who are going to be going into a substantial commitment. And buying a home is really one of the biggest commitments that we make, and financial commitments that we make, as well as commitments in terms of our whole lifestyle, like where we live, how we live. So it's worth making that commitment. I think it's worth making that investment in doing that upfront work to avoid conflict that may flow down the road because we didn't test those assumptions about our partners, or we didn't ask what is important to them. So those are the kind of conversations that some people are very comfortable having. Some people are not so comfortable having those kind of conversations. So if that's the case, then you might want to engage a mediator or some sort of a facilitator to help find those areas of interest that may not be obvious, and to identify them and to see if they are really so important. Like, are they deal breakers? You need to know that up front, because you don't want to find that out 6 months into your residency, and you find that you've got something that you just cannot live with. And all sorts of things cascade out of that when anger starts to boil up, the negative emotions that can keep us from actually dealing with what is the issue, what is the underlying issue. So we do have opportunities in advance. Like, I know that NOM has wonderful skills at talking to people and finding out what it is that they need, where they're looking for a place to live, what it looks like, how do we arrange the finances around that. And that's something else that really has to come out right at the beginning, because we can't make assumptions about big issues like that. So if there is an arrangement where it's upstairs, downstairs, or a main house and a carriage house, any other, you can just think of any number of configurations that aren't necessarily equal in size or in privacy, various things that can really affect how your enjoyment or your sort of place in that co-housing arrangement. Now, do you structure the finances to reflect that? Are there people who have greater ability to pay and want to pay for that? And then what happens if circumstances change? Are we considering that? If circumstances change after you've signed on the dotted line, you've already got all of these other things sorted out, one of the big things we have to think about is an exit strategy. So what if people get divorced and circumstances change that way? And maybe one of them will stay, one will leave, or they both decide to leave that arrangement. What if somebody gets pregnant and there isn't room for child's bedroom? There are all sorts of questions that we need to take into account, or circumstances we need to take into account, that if such and such should happen, or a death, that happens. And so there's another thing that we need to consider. Now, I should say at the outset here, although I'm a member of the Canadian Bar Association, I'm a non-practicing lawyer, and I'm not a member of the Law Society. And so I'm not going to give you any legal advice. So don't take anything I say as legal advice, but I would advise you to get a lawyer who knows what they're doing and can answer questions like, do you enter into this agreement as joint tenants, or tenants in common? How is this going to be arranged? Because it can make all the difference in the world how you effect the exit, especially if somebody dies. So those things have to really be taken into account right up front. And a good lawyer will be giving you some good advice about what is best for your arrangement. So those are the big things, I think, that have to be considered before you start getting down to the brass tacks. Let me think, what else do we need to know?
Well, Lisa, I'm going to just cut in with a question on that topic, because you mentioned a lot of the questions that you mentioned are questions that the lawyer and or myself can help identify. So talk a little bit about the process and where you would come in combination with the lawyer and the realtor and the whole thing, and why having the mediator is actually allows you to go deeper and do better than you're going to get from just a conversation with me or a skilled lawyer.
Well, a good mediator will be helping you to have an honest discussion. So a mediator is a neutral party, and is skilled in convening conversations, especially difficult conversations, and then leading the parties by example with listening skills, active listening skills, listening to be heard, but also hearing what is being said. Because sometimes we're so busy thinking about what we're going to say next, we're not actually hearing something very interesting, something that is germane to my own interest. I might miss that if I'm so busy thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. So a good mediator will perhaps coach if the parties need some coaching about those active listening skills, but also be listening too for points of agreement, for ideas that need to be explored further, for clarification. And that can help bring the parties to come to a better discussion, like more direct discussion about what is actually the problem. And often it is masked by people not wanting to actually say what it is that they really need. And a skilled mediator will be able to help the parties have that conversation in a way that is safe, and people can feel that they can really come clean on what it is that is concerning them or is really important to them, or something about the other party that maybe it's communication skills, maybe it's behavior. It could be anything that is getting in the way of a good relationship and a good working relationship in terms of co-owning or co-housing, whatever we're dealing with. It has to do with the working relationship between people who have to live together. And when it comes to families living together, it may be best to get a skilled family mediator. I don't do family mediation. There are many family mediators on the Mediate BC roster who are very skilled, especially when it comes to issues. So I brought up the issue before of divorce. If there are issues with shared parenting, that sort of thing, you really need to get someone who is qualified in those issues to come in and help to resolve any conflict. But we really do have successful ways of dealing with conflict as mediators. And I can tell you that I never fail to be surprised by the kind of resolutions that the parties come up with themselves. The mediator is never going to come up with a solution for you. It's always between the parties. It's always voluntary. And sometimes, you're grinding through some of the weeds, and then all of a sudden a light comes on and an amazing solution comes up between the parties that I would never have thought of before. And these people have made a breakthrough. And it's very gratifying to be witness to that. And so I do encourage people, if you are in conflict of any sort, consider mediation. If you feel that, it's somewhat intractable and it's, not going anywhere, sometimes you just need that neutral party in between who can help you get through those issues. I have examples of situations, but maybe Noam has some examples of his own.
We'll start with yours. I'm not sure. Fortunately, I think one of the big questions, of course, is I don't see the conflicts, right? I see people as they're in the process of planning and setting up, and I'm hoping I'm setting them up for success. But I guess I might see them again when they have problems down the road and one of them wants to sell off their share. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. But on that stage, I do encourage folks clearly to plan in advance, because if you discuss things and you open up and you identify stuff, you can hopefully avoid conflict. But then the flip side of it is conflict does happen. I guess I assume I'm at the early stage, but I assume down the road conflict will happen. So you can tell some stories, or you can just say, what do you what do you do to, so there's two parts to this session, right? One is advanced planning to avoid conflict, and the second part is conflict resolution. So talk a little bit about what you do when conflict does arise.
Well, if I'm asked, um, I do interviews with the parties individually, and I always share the space equally. So the time that I spend with each party is always equal. It's the whole process is confidential. Mediation is based in trust, and so there has to be confidentiality and trust in the process, and the process has to be fair. So a lot of that fairness is equal time, and the parties need to be heard. They need to feel that they're heard, whether it's by the mediator, so that the mediator understands what the issues are, and then also by the other parties, so that the mediator can help to get that communication going in a productive way. And that's where the, it's usually, if my average mediation sessions proper take about 2 hours. And much of the beginning session of the session will be just sort of what has come, what has brought us to this position. And we have to hear that. And the mediator's job then is to say, okay, so that's what has brought us here. That's essentially what is in the past. We're here today, and we're going to look at ways that we can resolve what brought us to this. And it may not even be what was just said. It could be something else entirely, but that might be discovered in the course of the mediation. And then it's forward looking. And then it's looking at, what are things that can be done? How can communication be improved? Whatever the circumstances are, whatever the nature of the conflict or the dispute is explored in generalities, essentially, not, picking it apart and then going back and into the past and into the grievances. Looking forward, how could that be dealt with differently? What are some ways that we can resolve this in a way that is lasting, so we won't keep having this problem again and again? So a lot of conflict is based on misunderstanding, I have found. And so the importance of the mediation process is to get past that misunderstanding, whatever it's rooted in, to find the good intentions that are often there, that have been misunderstood, or assumptions have been made about what their intentions really were. So, and then other times people can just be behaving badly. And so you have to find a way that you can get past that problem that can fester for a long time unless it's addressed and there is some sort of a resolution. And often it can be just as simple as an apology. It could be that, yes, they did mean to do that because they were angry about something else. And then, you come to a point where that's all they needed to hear. That's all the other party needed to hear was, yes, I did that and I'm sorry. And then it's like, okay, so how do we avoid this happening again in the future? And we deal with it that way. So disputes, conflict, all over the place. But what it comes down to, I think, often is a sense of being respected, being able to trust. And that's really the basis of most of our relationships, isn't it? So mediator is really just sort of a relationship mender.
Yeah, well, I often say that as a real estate agent, I'm a relationship coach as much as anything else, because I hear very different things from both parties of what they're looking for, and I have to be the one in between to try to say, are you sure that your partner wants this and you want that? And well, you guys should talk together about exactly what you need. So you made reference to a few common points of conflict or a few common points of concern. You made reference to financing. You made reference to exit strategies. You made reference to some lifestyle issues like noise. You asked me before where I see points of conflict, or I see potential points of conflict. And these are the ones where people kind of bring up to me in advance. What about this? What about that? I also hear a lot about concerns around cleanliness, pets, and around kind of how to use shared spaces. And I think you made reference to some experience with this in co-housing and co-ops. So why don't you talk a little bit more about these common points of conflict, and what you've seen that causes conflict and what you've seen that alleviates it.
Right. Well, as I said before, the issues of trust and confidentiality are really important. So just speaking generally about experiences
Of course.
I've had, yes. Well, there was a co-op housing issue, and this is very common, and you brought up the noise issue, no, and I'm often dealing with noise. I can't tell you how many times I've had to recommend a testing company who can come in to test the noise volume of the hardware floors up above, and what can be done, and dampening of the sound and between the walls of various apartment units. And noise is a big issue, a really big issue. And so there's in this example, it was extreme, and it had to do with the child as well. So a couple upstairs had a 5-year-old child, 4-year-old child, and they knew about the sound issue, and so they had installed carpeting over the hardwood floors to dampen sound. And the people who lived downstairs, and it was 3 people in a shared space, that one of whom was particularly sensitive to the noise issue. And it didn't matter what the people upstairs did to mitigate it. And the child knew that, that people downstairs don't like it. And there's a lot of banging of broomsticks from down below, and alarming the child too. And so it got to the point where, the interpersonal conflict was affecting the rest of the co-op. People were feeling the effects of it. And this is being exacerbated by the pandemic issues. And everybody was holed up and, going a bit stir crazy. So it went on for a while, and there was a lot of evasion. Like, one of the parties did not want to agree to a meeting time to have a mediation session, even though they had signed the agreement to mediate. And so it started dragging on and on. And so I eventually did shuttle mediation just between the parties. And it turned out that something completely different came up with another unit. So these were 3 stacked, one above the other. And the middle people agreed to switch with the lower people. And they moved into the middle apartment, and so everybody was happy. It was all sort of the same layout and everything. It was just that the circumstances changed. They took advantage of that. Bingo, bango, bongo, we're so happy in the Congo. Everything turned out all right. And that was it. Like, who would have thought that would solve it? But it did. And so there was one that had an unexpected resolution, which worked for them. There are other things that have happened where, you were talking about shared facilities, and I'm thinking about one dispute between duplex owners both of whom were lawyers. And so this was a situation where neither party thought that mediation was going to work, but it was court-ordered mediation, so they couldn't get around it. And so there are a lot of legal letters flying back and forth and threats. And it was all about a garage, a shared garage, and who was taking up how much space in that garage. And it was one that got away from me. I usually like to get them resolved, but this one got away from me, and it went to the Civil Resolution Tribunal. And the tribunal ruled an order that neither party liked. Like, talking to them in person, they had both sort of each agreed to a workable situation. It was sort of like a line down the middle kind of thing with, tape or whatever. And then they would just abide by that. But they wouldn't agree to it to each other. They only agree to it with me, which doesn't really count. So yes, they ended up with something that neither of them liked. It was changing locks and this and that. And the tribunal just came up with something that really, I don't think will work for either party, but they chose not to resolve it between themselves. So that's the cautionary tale. So you put that little bit of work in good faith, do some of the, humble work where you say, okay, well, I could be more considerate about using that space, or whatever the circumstance might be, and avoid, is there a long-term problem that wasn't of your making? Somebody else decided it for you. So there you go. I think that we have the tools to avoid conflict in the first place, but also to negotiate between the parties, have those conversations to say, okay, we ended up in this spot that we hadn't anticipated. So what are we going to do about it? And listen to find out how we got there from each other. So we've got real understanding, and we can sort of put those assumptions beside and start, doing that good work, the brainstorming about how can we make this work for both of us, or all of us, if we're in a multi-party situation.
I think a lot of times you think about mediation as trying to find a solution. You've got a problem and you need to have a third party to help you adjudicate the solution. And it seems very kind of narrow. But in talking to you, one thing that really spoke to me was this, and you've made reference to it here, that like the mediating process often brings people to creative, out of the box solutions that would never, it's not about, we split it at 50-50 and we have to come to agree on that. Oftentimes, you come with a totally different way to solve the problem. And I think that's an amazing part of what you do. And maybe you can talk more about that. And also, you just said that a lot of it is also about feeling heard and giving people the space to feel heard. So yeah, I mean, how much of what you do is really just like nitty gritty, let's solve the problems, and how much of it is, I don't know, how much of it ends up coming out in those kind of creative solutions?
I think a lot of it is in the creative solutions side. It's the magic that happens when people start talking to each other in a real way, where they're being honest. And so an example could be the yard. So somebody doesn't like mowing the lawn all the time, mowing the lawn. The other party just kind of, thought, well, it's too bad we can't have raised vegetable beds here, and just assumed that the other person liked their lawn and liked to mow it. And the lawn mowing person hates mowing the lawn and never told anybody, and actually would have preferred to have those raised beds there. So it's just, again, it's just about testing those assumptions and exploring solutions that everybody can if not be, overwhelmingly happy with, at least live with it. And that brings me something else that I didn't bring up earlier. And sometimes we do need to draw up an agreement. And that is, it protects people. You don't need to go all formal on it, but just, an agreement that each party signs. You sort of have it in your back pocket to remind you that this is what you came to an agreement on. If it does blow up or whatever, you can always remind the other party that this is what you had come to agreement on. And it's just sort of there. It's like a commitment that is formalized. And for some reason, that seems to create more durable resolutions. So it's just a suggestion, but I have found that we call them settlement agreements, or other terms. You can call it whatever you want, but just to write it down, and each party signs it, puts the date on it, and it serves as a reminder not only of what you agreed to, but that you can agree to resolve disputes in these kind of ways. And I think the most important part of that is in these particular circumstances where you're living together in whatever form, however shared it is, or separate, and just shared property, whatever the circumstances are, you're still in a relationship with these people, and hopefully it will be long-term, even if it's only 5 years, if that's what you'd agreed to. You still would want to have a relationship with those people ongoing. If you move on or whatever, you would want that relationship to be a good one. And so that creates the circumstances where, you heal any kind of conflict that may have arisen, and you move on better than you were before. And that, creates those lasting relationships that are also durable.
So we have a comment in the chat, and I want to encourage people now to use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you. In fact, I'll even allow you to unmute yourself, and put some questions in the chat, and we can have a bit of a conversation here with Lisa. The question we have here, the comment we have here, I should say, is it useful to do some education boundary understanding in writing? To put down how you feel, lay it out before you actually talk, maybe back and forth. And they reference here particularly for cross-cultural situations, or just kind of life situations that others might not fully understand. They reference night shift working, or new baby, or these kind of things that really are outside the norm for the average person. So how do you help people do that in advance?
Yes, and brief notes slipped under the door. I think that that way of communicating can feel maybe a bit passive aggressive, like that will put the other person on the defensive. So I think it really is important, sort of upfront, to get those issues that are important to you out there. So if you are a night worker, and your sleep is really important to you during the day, because otherwise your health will be affected, those things need to be discussed. And Noam can probably talk better about how people can arrange their living situation to best accommodate those sort of different lifestyles and circumstances. So you can't help if a baby is crying or making noise or whatever. So to have people who are in those kind of situations separated, or good soundproofing or whatever, there are various ways that you can deal with these things. And the best way to do it is straight up front, to just talk about it and say, when I get back from work, I'm exhausted. my circadian rhythm is completely discombobulated. I need to, sleep during the day, and sound, light, all these things can really disrupt that, and my health suffers for it. The other people may not have even considered that if they have never had those kind of work shifts, that it just wouldn't occur to them that that's something that would be a problem. So it's just about raising awareness in a non-confrontational way, in a way that just said, I'd really like to talk to you about this issue that's affecting me. And you talk about how it's affecting you, not how they are affecting you or their behavior is a problem. It's just that it is affecting you negatively, and you'd like to talk to them about ways that you can resolve that. And sometimes that is just like, oh, the other party says, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. What can we do to make this work? And that you don't need a mediator or anything like that. People can come to understanding and arrangements between themselves. So I think, though, the upfront is very important. So when you are looking to arrange a living situation with other people, your expectations and your needs really should be right there up front. And also, I think it's important to consider those, I was going to go to it later, but the exit strategy issues are very important. So death, pregnancy, that sort of thing can create a situation where you need to find a new party, couple, person, family, whatever it is, to fill that gap. Hopefully in your financial arrangement, your legal agreement, you have all of that covered in terms of how does that work when they leave, and you don't want to be on the hook with a huge mortgage that is suddenly now without one payer. You set up arrangements in advance on how you're going to do that. The caution is, and this has been a problem in co-housing arrangements since forever. A new person comes in, and that may be as the partner of somebody who's already living there, or maybe a person who is filling in that gap. And you need to know that that person is the right fit, personality-wise, commitment-wise, all of those things that you went through in arranging your agreement. That has to happen again, and you have to be sure, because there are, I'm sorry, it's just like there are so many cases where the term now is toxic personality, but we know there are bullies, there are people who like to be controlling, people who will turn parties against each other for their own benefit, or even just for psychological reasons. I can't tell you how many times I encountered this dealing in strata situations at the Civil Resolution Tribunal. And in a strata, there's not much you can do about it. Somebody buys a strata and, they pay their strata fees and they're an owner, and you just have to deal with them. But if you're in a co-housing arrangement or co-ownership arrangement, you do have some control. And I urge people to really take that time to ask those questions, to be straight about what your expectations are, and to make sure that you don't end up in that kind of a situation where it just makes your life a living hell. So there are ways to avoid that. And I think people are conflict averse naturally. Some people that love conflict. You don't want to be living with those people, though. That's what I would suggest. But yes, there are ways to deal with things, and my advice is always to deal with it as honestly and transparently as you can, and come from a place of how it affects you, and a willingness, a curiosity even, as to how you can resolve this issue. No, your
Thank
screen.
you.
There we go.
Great. So I just want to see if there are any questions, comments, queries, quandaries. And while you're thinking about that, there'll be some time at the end. And if people want to ask their questions off video after, Lisa can hang out for a few minutes, and her contact information will be at the end. So just to close up a little bit here before people head out, clearly Coho BC has a lot going on. We have resources on our website that we encourage you to check out. Our guide to co-ownership with lots of comments and questions in the process, thoughts for partnership agreements, things that you can think through in advance with your lawyers and then bring to your mediator if there's any points that you're not in full agreement on, or areas where you just don't know what you're not in agreement on and you want to explore a little bit deeper. Those of you who may not have an ideal partner but want to find somebody, we have a matchmaking service. So please go to our website and fill out the survey. There are a number of larger co-ownership initiatives happening across BC right now, and then a lot of people doing small scale stuff with friends and family. So please reach out to us to find out more information about these kind of things. And do join us for our next event, which is the What is Real Estate Co-Ownership and How Can It Work for Me on December 7th, or stay tuned for our upcoming schedule for the new year, which will be announced soon. But thank you all really for joining us for this, and really a deep thank you to Lisa for her really insightful words and her experience. Please reach out to her if you need her professional services. Reach out to me for real estate advice, or to Coho. Information is there. And open the floor back up to see if there's any last thoughts or questions people would like to share with the group or ask of Lisa. I have one here on the chat. 3 women in their mid-60s, no children. 2 of us own property, 1 not. Need advice on lawyers, financial stuff. Oh, and how we can do the financial breakdown. This is, I think, a more specific conversation. Happy to advise you offline about who the lawyers are to talk to, and what are some models for breaking it down. Lisa, do you have any general questions about people coming in with differential financial amounts, or kind of any thoughts for this person?
Well, that's, again, you have to explore it about what the needs are, and what the expectations are. And it may be that people with greater financial resources have an interest in helping somebody else out. And the reciprocity can be shown in various ways. You just never know. And so that's why I say I'm always surprised by the solutions that people come up with. People with goodwill can be so creative, and it's just like, it's great to see. It's great to see human beings behaving that way. I love it.
And I think one thing that we've certainly seen is you don't have to tie in your ownership stake to your occupancy stake or to your power stake.
Yes.
You can create unique models where different people own higher shares or whatever based on what they come with, but you pay your rent to the collective based on the space that you own, and you can decide that all decisions are made equally collectively, irrespective of how much space anyone has or how much money anyone has, things like that. So you don't need to be tied to the money. You really can create your ideal community.
What a great idea. That's so nice. Freeing.
Any other comments or questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us, for patiently following us as we rescheduled a few times.
Can you talk, sorry to interrupt.
Please, go for it.
Is it okay to ask, hi, my name is Liz Marshall. I'm on the Sunshine Coast. Is it okay for you to talk a little bit more about that, what you just said about the financial part? I didn't understand what you said.
Okay. I think that the overall point is that, of course, every situation is unique. And as long as you talk effectively, explore all the possibilities and come to agreement, you can make a situation that works for you. The specific situation that I'm referring to is a model where your occupancy, or how much of the house you live in and how much of the monthly costs you pay, aren't necessarily directly tied to the amount of the house you own. So you can, let's say one person happens to have more money, they can own 50% of the property, and two other people have less money, they own 25% respectively, or whatever it is. But then the space that they occupy, let's say it's divided up equally all three ways, so everyone has a third of the home. And then you would look at what your monthly mortgage is, what your taxes are, what your, all your expenses are for the year. And maybe everyone would pay an equal third of those costs. And so, you're not directly tied to your ownership stake, or you can go the other way. Or sometimes you have people who have a higher income, and so they will pay more in the monthly cost, but they have less down payment because they just don't have the savings. Someone else may be retired or have less of an income but have owned property and have the savings. So one will pay the monthly costs and one will do the down payment. There are ways to structure it around your particular needs. And then as long as you communicate and you understand the equality of the situation and how it works for everybody, and there's no one's resentful, you can create models that work for you. Lisa, do you have any follow-up with that?
I think that's just great. And I'm hoping that this movement grows. I think that, there's so much scope for different arrangements and accommodation styles. All of these things are just, percolating up right now. And so I'm just really glad to be involved with you and Coho BC, Noam, and look forward to talking to people. You don't have to have a formal consultation with me. If you have questions about what you should be thinking about in terms of making sure that you've got all of the potential conflict considered, then please just drop me a line and I'm happy to chat with you about that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Any other last comments or questions out there? So please do. You've all been added to the Coho BC mailing list. Hopefully you choose to stay on. Please come to future events. Please reach out to us to explore your personal situation. And please stay safe as the next atmospheric river comes our way in these crazy times. Thank you, Lisa, so much. And everyone, have a wonderful night.
Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.